Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt and inspiring tales that resonate with real life. In today's story, we follow Emily, a woman who seemed to have it all: a loving husband, a stable career, and a promising future. But as cracks began to form in her seemingly perfect life, Emily faced betrayal, heartbreak, and the ultimate test of strength. Through resilience and love for her child, she discovered the power to rebuild and reclaim her happiness. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories to start today's journey. Let's dive into Emily's emotional and transformative story. 4 years. I believed I had crafted the kind of life most people could only dream of. My name is Emily, and I'm 32 years old. I worked as a project manager for a thriving tech company, earning financial independence and a sense of accomplishment. I had a husband, Jacob, who I thought was my perfect match, a kind, dependable man with whom I was building a bright future. We lived in a cozy home in Chicago, one we had worked hard to make our own. Life felt steady, full of possibilities. Jacob's family was an integral part of his life, and at first, I admired how close they were. His mother, Diane, was the matriarch, charming and warm on the surface, while his younger brother, Ethan, was the energetic one, always eager to follow Diane's lead. When I first joined their family dinners, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The gatherings were lively, filled with laughter, hearty meals, and a sense of connection I hadn't felt since my own parents passed away. Diane welcomed me with open arms, smiling and asking about my work with what seemed like genuine interest. A project manager. Huh. You must be brilliant at keeping everything in order, she'd say, her words making me feel seen and valued. But what started as warmth began to feel like something else. Little comments started to creep in, hidden behind her polite smile. I remember one evening vividly. We had all gathered for a family dinner, and I went to the kitchen to refill my drink. As I walked in, I overheard Diane's voice. "She tries too hard," she said with a sharp laugh, always so eager to impress. "But honestly, she doesn't really fit in here." I froze in the doorway, her words hitting me like a punch to the stomach. My heart sank. Were they talking about me, the very family I had worked so hard to bond with? From that moment, the joy I felt at these gatherings began to fade. I started noticing the whispers, the pointed glances, the little remarks Diane would make. And Jacob, he would sit there, silent, avoiding my eyes, offering no support. Every time I tried to bring it up, he dismissed it. "You're overthinking it, Emily," he'd say. "That's just how she is." I wanted to believe him. I told myself no family was perfect and that I just needed to try harder. But the more I tried, the more I realized that Diane's warmth toward me was an act. Ethan followed her lead, loyal as a shadow, and together they created a bond that felt impenetrable. I'll never forget the breaking point. It was an Easter Sunday lunch, and the family had gathered around the table. The conversation turned to a distant relative who had fallen on hard times. Diane smirked and said, "Well, I suppose not everyone is smart enough to plan for the future." Her tone dripped with condescension. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I set down my fork, my hands trembling slightly, and looked directly at her. "That's not fair," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're doing the best they can. It's not right to belittle someone for something out of their control." The room fell silent. Diane raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk on her lips. "Oh, Emily," she said sharply, "don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. You really need to learn to lighten up." I turned to Jacob, desperate for some kind of support. He just stared at his plate, shifting uncomfortably. That silence from him cut deeper than any of Diane's words ever could. For the first time, I realized how alone I was in this family. After that day, everything felt different. Family gatherings, once filled with laughter and connection, became minefields. I started making excuses to avoid them: work commitments, headaches, errands I couldn't postpone. But even when I stayed home, I felt the weight of their judgment hanging over me. Jacob, meanwhile, grew closer to his family, especially Diane. He'd come home after these gatherings with stories of how wonderful the evening had been, completely oblivious to the growing distance between us. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought this might be the turning point. I hoped it would bring us closer together, give us a fresh start as a family. But my pregnancy was far from the joyful experience I had imagined. From the very beginning, it was a struggle: constant nausea, dizziness, and eventually, a rare complication that affected my eyesight. I needed Jacob's support more than ever, but he was nowhere to be found. At first, he made half-hearted attempts to help. "I'm just not good at this stuff, Emily," he'd say with a shrug. Soon, even those efforts stopped. He began spending more time at Diane's house or helping Ethan with his errands. Every time I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he dismissed my concerns. "You're always tired," he snapped one evening. "How hard can it really be to just rest?" By the time my C-section was scheduled, I was emotionally and physically drained. On the day of the surgery, as I lay on the cold operating table, fear consumed me. I searched the room for Jacob. "Where's my husband?" I asked the nurse, my voice trembling. She gave me a kind but firm smile. "He said he'd wait outside." Her words hit me like a slap. He wasn't even there when I needed him most. When I heard my baby's first cries, tears of relief filled my eyes. But that joy was fleeting. Hours later, Jacob walked into the recovery room, his face full of discomfort, not pride. "I don't understand why this was necessary," he muttered, barely glancing at our newborn. Back in the day, men weren't even supposed to be in these situations. What happened to privacy? His words stung more than I could have imagined. And when he stormed out, leaving me alone with our baby, I realized this was the moment my perfect life had truly crumbled. After the birth of my son, Nathan, I found myself entering what would become the most challenging phase of my life. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and overwhelming emotions. I was physically drained from the surgery and emotionally exhausted from Jacob's absence. It wasn't just his physical absence but the emotional void he left behind that hurt the most. In the early days, I tried to remain hopeful. I thought, perhaps, holding Nathan in his arms would ignite something in Jacob: a spark of fatherly love, a desire to bond with his family. But it didn't. His distance only grew. And when he was home, his presence felt more like a shadow than a support. One night, as Nathan's cries pierced through the silence of our home, I found myself pacing the nursery, trying desperately to calm him. My own body trembled with exhaustion. But I pressed on, rocking him gently. Jacob, in the other room, shouted over the noise, "Can you shut him up already? I'm trying to sleep." The words hit me like a slap. "His teething." "Jacob," I replied, my voice barely concealing my frustration. "It hurts him. I'm doing the best I can." Jacob stormed into the room, his face twisted with irritation. "All you do is focus on him. What about me? What about our marriage?" I wanted to scream, to tell him how much I was struggling, how I was barely holding it together. But instead, I turned my back to him, focusing on Nathan, my son, the one person in this world who truly needed me. Jacob muttered something under his breath and left the room, slamming the door behind him. The loneliness I felt in those moments was unbearable. It wasn't just about the lack of sleep or the physical strain, it was the emotional isolation. The person I had once leaned on, the man I had married, had become a stranger. And yet, I still clung to the hope that things might change. As the months went on, Jacob's dissatisfaction with our life became more evident. He started coming home later, spending more time at Diane's house or helping Ethan with various errands. When he was home, His complaints overshadowed everything else. He'd talk about how hard life had become, how he felt trapped, how I wasn't the same woman he'd married. One evening, as I was feeding Nathan in the dimly lit living room, Jacob walked in and dropped a bombshell. "You need to go back to work," he said abruptly. I looked at him, stunned. "What?" "Jacob. The baby still needs me. And with my eyesight." "We'll hire a nanny," he interrupted, his tone dismissive. "We can't keep living like this. We need the money." I tried to reason with him, explaining how difficult it would be to manage everything with my impaired vision. But it was clear he had already made up his mind. Reluctantly, I started job hunting, my heart heavy with the weight of his demands. Eventually, I found a position at a small company. It paid less than my previous job, but it was something. When I shared the news with Jacob, hoping for a shred of encouragement, he scoffed. "That's it. We're paying a nanny for this." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay composed. "I'm doing my best, Jacob. It's not easy with my eyesight." "Excuses," he muttered, walking away without another word. It was during one of these arguments that everything changed. Jacob came home late one evening, visibly irritated. He threw his bag onto the couch and glared at me. "What now, Jacob?" I asked, my voice trembling with exhaustion. "You think it's easy for me," he yelled. "Dealing with you and your constant whining?" I couldn't hold back anymore. "Whining? I've been doing everything, Jacob. Everything. And you've been." Before I could finish, he stepped forward and slapped me across the face. The force sent me stumbling back. And for a moment, I stood there, stunned. My hand flew to my cheek as tears streamed down my face. "What is wrong with you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Jacob didn't apologize. Instead, he muttered something under his breath and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, as I held Nathan close, I knew something had to change. This wasn't the life I wanted for myself or for my child. The love I had once felt for Jacob had been replaced by fear, resentment, and a deep, aching sadness. For the first time, I began to consider the unthinkable, leaving. The thought terrified me, but as I looked at Nathan's tiny face, I knew I couldn't let him grow up in a home filled with anger and pain. I had to find the strength to protect him, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. In the end, I found the courage to rebuild my life. Leaving Jacob was the hardest decision I ever made, but it was also the most liberating. Slowly, I created a home filled with love and stability for Nathan and me, free from the chaos and pain of the past. Every step forward, no matter how small, felt like a victory. Jacob and his family's betrayal taught me a profound lesson. True strength comes from within. I realized I didn't need anyone's approval to thrive, I just needed to believe in myself and prioritize the well-being of my child. Now, as I watch Nathan laugh and grow, I know I made the right choice. Our future is bright, filled with hope and possibility. Thank you for reading my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more heartfelt tales. See you in the next video.